Okay.
That's why I really gravitate towards working on those smaller independent projects. Because a lot of times there is no machine, and you know, if depending on what your goals are and things, I mean, if you're trying to make money, it's financially very risky to do that. Which is why, you know, sometimes it seems good to, you know, maybe not try to conflate your monetary desires with your passion.
Right.
I think there's something to be said about that. You know, even though it worked out for me, there are fallbacks to it, and it doesn't work out for everybody. But and I think independent games too, with like publishers that you work with, they are presenting sort of an indie, you know, sensibility or something, and a lot of that is sort of hands off, I think, to some degree. I mean, they definitely, you know, give you feedback and stuff, but it's not the same as, you know, working for some giant, you know,
multinational
publisher. Yeah, exactly. It's not going to be the same sort of experience.
Sure. Yeah. And hopefully that window doesn't like shrink, because I feel like 10 years ago was that sweet spot where the ability to create and self-publish was a lot easier. Not easier in the sense that like it's harder to do that now. It's like you can pretty easily self-publish, but to be on the radar of everybody is a lot harder now, and requires things like Annapurna, who helps publish indie titles, and these sort of publishers that have risen out of the indie boom.
Intermediate. Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with market competition stuff, because, you know, 10 years ago when Fez came out, Braid came out, Super Meat Boy, Spelunky, like all these games, there wasn't that much competition in that space. It was sort of the frontier at that time. You know, you had Xbox Live Arcade, and I don't even think
Steam. What a great system. Yeah.
I don't even think Steam was out yet. So it was a very different landscape, and the idea of independent games was very novel at that point. So it was like it was a very lucky time to get into that kind of thing, and access to resources was not as great as it is now. I mean, it's really great, and there's tons of information on everything.
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier to get started at making something.
Yeah.
We're just now flush with content now, which is the difficulty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just to for clarity, for the audience, Steam, for those who are like, wow, but Steam was out. Steam was out, but it wasn't open for self-publishing yet. That came in
right. I remember
2012.
I remember Greenlight wasn't out yet, right? Like Greenlight, exactly. They were just talking about Greenlight right around that time.
And then they were charging, like when it first came out, you had to pay $100 just to do it, or something like just to prove that you were serious. Right,
prove that you were indie.
To
prove that you're indie, here is $100 that you probably don't have.
Right, exactly. Like, but you're kind of missing the point. Okay, whatever. No,
I get you.
Yeah.
But it's a very different environment at that time.
Your current thing that you're kind of been working on is it D-Lab?
Yeah, that's something that I announced, and the idea essentially is to have an umbrella for all of my creative software projects. That could be games. It's going to be a lot of music software. There's going to be maybe some educational type resources, websites, everything that's basically not like a Disasterpeace album or something where I'm writing music.
Got it.
That's sort of the general idea for it. It's sort of the laboratory, and there's just a lot of stuff over the years that I've built as like a prototype, something that's functional, like for music software as an example. After Mini Metro, I got really into the idea of what if I could take this system and make it into a tool that you could use in a DAW or something like that. And so, it sent me down this path of I use Logic Pro, and they released an API around that time that lets you make your own MIDI, like little MIDI trinkets, like inserts, like plugin basically. And so I just started like experimenting with all these different ideas I had for how to manipulate MIDI and generate MIDI. And I have all these things that I built that are, I think, really interesting and cool. And there's not a whole lot. I get motivated by things that I feel like, does this need to exist because this is not around.
Right.
Like that tends to be a motivating factor for me sometimes. So there's a fair amount of that, I think, where it's like, oh yeah, this is different, and I think people would appreciate this, and it would be fun. So I feel like a responsibility to like steward all this work I did over like the last 6-7 years in this area, and so that was sort of like the primary like kind of momentum creator for D-Lab is all this MIDI stuff that I've been doing. But I also have, you know, I would like to make another game at some point, and you know, I have other projects that I've been kind of hatching. So that is the intention.
But it sounds like a really cool way to like to put this together into something that people can subscribe to, and there's like a mechanism for all of that.
Yeah, I have a Bandcamp subscription thing.
Okay, cool.
Which gets you music.
Yeah. What is the Bandcamp?
Yeah, disasterpeace.com/subscribe, and that basically gets you a copy of all my music.
So how do people check out D-Lab and sort of start looking at your experiments?
You can't really right now. You can join my mailing list. There's 1 or 2 YouTube videos floating around on my channel of like MIDI script experiments, and there's one called Tremolo ADSR, which is a prototype, one of the prototypes that I made a little video about. That's about it. I mean, if you play Mini Metro, if you play Mini Motor, a lot of my procedural ideas are in those games, so that might give you a little bit of a idea about what may be coming. But